Welcome to the Global Script, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Shafat Ali and you're watching Ocean News. Tonight on the Global Script, the Taliban want the world to see them differently, not as isolated militant rulers of the 1990s, but as a government with embassies, trade deals, and even a tourism industry. Since seizing power in August 2021, they've been on a diplomatic charm offensive, signing multi-million-dollar mining deals with China, hosting Russian envoys, sending ambassadors in the UAE, and telling United Nations that they are partners in their fight against the ISIS-KP. And in some places, it's working. Russia formally recognized them this July. China is investing in their copper mines, and UAE is managing their airports. But here's a contradiction. While they quote foreign investment and a tout 95% drop in the opium production, they're also enforcing one of the harshest gender apartheid systems in the world, banning women from schools, universities, and most jobs. The International Criminal Court has even issued arrest warrants for gender persecutions. On security, they promise not to harbor terrorists, yet UN report says that Al-Qaeda still operates inside Afghanistan. So which Taliban is the world dealing with? The pragmatic state-minder quoting Beijing and Moscow, or the same hardline movement that ruled in the 1990s? Tonight, we break down the Taliban 2.0, their diplomatic playbook, their economic debts, and the global powers buying in, and the human rights red lines they refuse to cross. Well, joining me now live is former Ambassador Ashraf Hydari, who's also founder and president of Displaced International. Thank you so much for joining in the show. We're also joined by Ziauddin Yousafzai, who is Malala Yousafzai's father and also a very vocal voice on girls' education around the world. Thank you so much, sir, for joining in. And also Remshe Ahmed, who is also a journalist and an expert on these issues. So we welcome all of these guests to our show. We'll start with you, Zia Saab. Of course, there's no one better to speak on when we talk about girls' education around the world, but especially Afghanistan, where there has been 4 years and the girls have been out of their institutions, their schools, their colleges, their universities, and there have been a lot of other problems. How do you see the situation, and what do you think can be done to evaluate the scale of the problem?
Thank you so much. Honestly, for me as a man, as a father from Swat, once upon a time, whose own daughter and 50,000 more girls were banned from education, 400 schools were destroyed by the Pakistani Taliban. I can deeply realize and feel the pain and the sufferings of the Afghan girls, millions of Afghan girls who have been stopped from going to school over grade 6 for the last 4 years. It's so painful. On 15 August 2021, when Kabul fell to the Taliban, it was not just the fall of Kabul, it was the fall of women's rights. And since then, Taliban have established, and it is getting normalized with every passing day, which is more painful, that gender apartheid system that they have imposed on Afghanistan by force, and where women and girls have been dehumanized. They are annihilated from the surface of Afghanistan. They're not seen in school, they're not seen in public. They can't go to public places, and university education has been banned for them for the last 4 years. And if girls had been in school, now we would have so many doctors in hospitals, nurses, engineers, lawyers, solicitors, and so many women and non-governmental organizations, governmental organizations, but everything has stopped since for the last 4 years. So it's really painful. And while it is getting harder and harder with every passing day, like the world is looking at it and they are doing it with impunity, and everything that is happening is really inhuman, un-Afghanic, un-Islamic, and unnatural as well. So that's my short summary on the situation of the last 4 years. Yeah.
Remshe, coming towards you, how do you see, as a journalist, as a humanitarian expert, this situation when the neighboring countries like Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Russia, China is interested in having a Belt Road corridor, a BRI route from Afghanistan all the way towards Iran? That gives a lot of strength to the current Taliban regime. Do you think that with all these players jumping in, the situation is going to change for the women and girls' education in Afghanistan?
As an optimist, one can hope that the situation eventually will improve with greater socioeconomic projects coming to the country. But right now, these are all conversations. We know for a fact that when you are negotiating with a non-state actor, um, with a very rogue actor that is dominating the country right now, they will definitely draw up a hard bargain. It's not going to be like negotiating with Pakistan, which is a democracy. It's going to be a very different situation. So, to expect the Taliban regime to um, forge these kind of relationships where they are also introducing socioeconomic projects where they will be promising or working towards greater education initiatives for the Afghan women is, I think, a bit of an optimistic vision. And right now, it is important for us to realize what the on ground situation is. Because we've seen that for the last, prior to 2021, for the last 20 years before that, the presence of US troops did mean that there were democratic reforms introduced. It also meant greater civic freedoms for a lot of Afghans. But the impact of those reforms was very much localized. You would not see these reforms coming into force all over the country, or women throughout the country had equitable access to education or employment opportunities, for instance. So even during that time, there was a lot of challenges that had to be overcome in order for Afghanistan to come out as, progressive for women. It was a peace aspiring nation, and right now the situation in the last 4 years has deteriorated even from that point. So we know for a fact that over 78% of women are not in formal education right now. They do not have access to any job opportunities. Most of these women have also been asked to step down from the government positions, which they were able to access during those last 20 years. So a lot has been rolled back. And in that rolling back, what has basically happened is that the democratic infrastructure that was laid down in those 20 years, which in itself was a huge challenge, has basically just collapsed. And the reason why the collapse has been so immaculate, has been so disastrous, is because it was standing on a very weak foundation. And we know for a fact that a lot of people who were working for these reforms in those 20 years have now fled the country. So now we have a situation where we have a very rogue actor dominating the country, where we do not have much to leverage in terms of how we can negotiate as regional actors. But at the same time, we have a humanitarian crisis that is unfolding before us, and there's not much that we can do. At the
Zasab, on that very point, I want to have Zasab's word on it. Zasab, just like Ramshay has mentioned, the catastrophe is beyond apprehension. One cannot even imagine that when you talk about the early childbearing increased by 45% in 3 years, when you talk about the maternal infant mortality rate going up by 50% by 2027, when you talk about the mental health issues rising up, when you talk about 8% of women in Afghanistan are prone to suicide or have attempted suicide. But we don't listen any of this from the international humanitarian organizations, although there has been a lot of focus towards Gaza as well. But this is also a very rising issue. We need more people to talk about it, but we don't listen about it that much. Why is that so?
Shafat, this is the question that we all are asking basically. Like for the last 4 years, as Remsha mentioned and Mr. Ashraf Saab mentioned, like Afghanistan is under a gender apartheid rule, and as Ashraf Saab mentioned, the wound is very deep. Like this gender apartheid is a system which has been imposed on Afghanistan, And the statistics that you mentioned, it is the outcome of that system. That when girls are not allowed to go to school, they are not allowed to go to work, they are not allowed to go to health institutions, they can't go even to a public place, and even their voice is prohibited. Their faces are veiled and they can't show their faces. So, in this kind of system, which the Afghan women's rights activists, they call it gender apartheid, and we support it, and we also demand the international community to codify it as gender apartheid in the international human rights treaty. So that's so much important, because as this happened in South Africa, when apartheid was declared as a crime against humanity, similarly in Afghanistan, there is a system that is gender apartheid, and it should be declared, it should be recognized as crime against humanity. So coming to your point, basically the world now, like whether they are regional powers, which Mr. Ashraf Saab hinted to, are global powers. Most of them are looking to Afghanistan in two terms. They view Afghanistan in security terms, as well as they look at it from natural resources point of view. But as Ashraf has mentioned, even from security point of view, they are creating a volcano. Like on the one hand, guns education has completely banned over grade 6. But on the other hand, the schools, like the boys' schools, universities, they are being converted into madrasas. Like the boys are indoctrinated with the jihad and with this extremism. So in that situation, in the coming like 5, 10, 15 years, there will be, on the one hand, there will be no girl, like no female teachers, no female doctors, no female anywhere working in the public sphere. But on the other hand, you will have these human bombs indoctrinated, radicalized, with extreme ideology. And maybe the world is waiting for another 9/11, I don't know. But the situation is really, really disastrous. And one thing that is said by the world, that, oh, it's peaceful now. But peace doesn't mean the peace of a graveyard. Afghanistan right now, honestly, it is a big prison, the world's biggest prison for half of its population and for non-Taliban people. It's a big prison indeed. So that kind of peace, we don't need that. Afghans don't need that. That is the peace of graveyard. Peace means life. Peace means rights. Peace means like culture. There is no music. There is no art. So this kind of garment of regime which is there in Afghanistan, really, I mean, it's a big challenge. And the world is looking away, and they're not taking any substantial action. I mean, few things happened in the past, like International Criminal Court, they have issued warrants.
A decree about Hibatullah, yeah.
About
they did. The Akhundzada.
And one other guy. But substantial steps are not being taken. And I totally agree with Ashraf that, I mean, in that fragile democracy of Afghanistan, the TTP Taliban were in jails. But as Afghan Taliban came into power, all those Taliban got free, and now they're in Pakistan.
On 10th August, Pakistani forces had a successful operation at the Afghan border, where 47 infiltrators, terrorist infiltrators, they were gunned down using quadcopters and drones. Ashraf Saab, coming towards you, just the question like I put forward, that there are international businesses who are intending to jump into Afghanistan. But we have seen that since 2022, there has been a shrinking in Afghan economy, and Afghan economy has shrunk by a disastrous 26% in the past 4 years alone. We don't have the numbers for 2024. Otherwise, it have been much more prominent. But do you think that if Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, China, Russia, UAE, like they are saying that they are interested in copper mining, they're interested in oil mining,
No, at a Just Talk, we've been hearing all these.
do you think that this is going to change the situation of the social fabric within Afghanistan? Your take on that, sir?
Fabric, unfortunately, is collapsing on a daily basis, with women daily being imprisoned and their basic human rights curtailed, with implications that I discussed, and also Mr. Yousafzai alluded to, that this is directly undermining regional most that and Iran. On the promise, especially of investment by regional players in Afghanistan, that's not going to materialize. I think the engagements are very pragmatic with a focus on security. Is the talk of investment, but shrouded in that is basically an effort on the part of our have some kind of security presence inside Afghanistan to just Taliban are up to. Taliban are not a trustworthy actor. They're a non-state actor, unfortunately, daily violating the United Nations Charter, other international laws, regional, of course, principles and laws and cultures, so to speak. And so they're not an actor to be trusted. And so that's why we haven't seen any kind of capital-intensive investment, either coming from China or India or other players in the region. Remember that right in the wake of the withdrawal of NATO forces, a lot of people thought optimistically that somehow China would fill the gap left behind by NATO, that China would put capital-intensive investment in Afghanistan's natural resources sector, but that has not materialized. If you look at how much China has invested in Afghanistan, it's almost zero, with the exception of a few investments here and there, and that's with some by some low-level, smaller Chinese firms. But on a intensive level, we haven't seen it yet, simply because Chinese do not trust the Taliban because of the Taliban's sheltering of ETIM, East Turkestan Islamic Movement, which is obsessed about west of China, Uyghurs. And so is the case with other terrorists sheltered by the Taliban, including IMU, Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, that is, as focused on destabilization of Central Asia. And of course, the presence of Al Qaeda is resurgent and expanded now, with Al Qaeda operating terrorist camps across Afghanistan's borders, including Pakistan, and directly and indirectly supplying and arming and TTP that has been heading Pakistan, and as well as Daesh, which has been carrying out operations in Pakistan and Iran and, of course, Central Asia. They're resurgent, and including those terrorist attacks in Moscow, if you recall, a massive terrorist attack by Daesh emanating from Afghanistan and Moscow, and as well as other such terrorist attacks and sleeper cells across Europe, and as well as here in the United States, some of them having made it to the US through the southern border under the former administration, because that an open border immigration policy that allowed some of these terrorists emanating from Afghanistan under the Taliban. So the talk of investments in Afghanistan by the region is just talk. You can go online and check it. There is nothing substantively and verifiably that shows that that the Taliban are actually attracting tangible investments in Afghanistan.
And the reason for that, you actually explained that yourself, that Taliban cannot be trusted. You just said it yourself, and that's probably the reason why international community is having more talks but less actions. But I have a theory about it, because we see that there is a lot of factionalism in Taliban's, especially in the Afghan ranks. We have seen that we have hardliners like Haibatullah, we have so-called pragmatists like Haqqani, and we have also seen that there is a sort of incohesion within the ranks of Afghans. Now, don't you think with people like you, with Afghans like you who have influence within the global community can actually have an influence among the global powers, the global players, and they can, utilize these rifts to facilitate the lives of the Afghan people within Afghanistan.
Absolutely not. I think that's not within our power. It's very much within the power of the state actors such as Pakistan, Iran, China, India, and the rest, whether bilaterally or multilaterally, as I pointed out, and other.
Ashraf Saab, do you actually think that if Pakistan asks Afghanistan to allow women education, they'll do that?
Well, they could definitely exploit those fissures and factional differences, but we haven't seen over the past 4 years, despite those differences and personal animosities, personal, tribal, sub-tribal. We can analyze that, but maybe it's not an appropriate time to do so. Despite that, the Taliban have stayed mostly united together, and their leader, Mullah Haibatullah, of course, issued a arrest warrant against him, and as well as against their.
Ashraf Saab, we will continue from here, but it's time for a quick break over here, sir. We will continue from here, but it's time for a quick break. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a really quick break. We'll be right back after this short break. Keep watching Ocean News. Welcome back after the break. Ladies and gentlemen, before going on to the break, we were discussing how international community can influence the Taliban government in Afghanistan. Ramshay, coming towards you, as a humanitarian expert, do you think that with all the shrinking economy and the humanitarian crisis which is going on, do you think that the situation in Afghanistan is going to deteriorate further?
Yes, it will definitely deteriorate further because right now, what we've seen in the last 4 years has been a deterioration of the sort of success that we saw coming out of Afghanistan in the last 20 years. We know for a fact that women are not allowed to even talk to each other anymore. They cannot even leave their homes without a male companion accompanying them. They cannot even go to wells for drinking water. They can't even have a conversation amongst themselves. So we all, and in addition to that, we also know for a fact that a lot of UN workers who were working for women's rights have been are continuing to be persecuted. They are harassed in their work. They do not have access to any more resources to continue their work. So this points towards a further deterioration of the situation, especially at a time when the economy is further shrinking, when there are no socioeconomic programs there. We also know for a fact that with the US aid stop that has been initiated by the Trump administration, there's not any kind of aid that's going into the country for any kind of development. And so people are now left at the mercy of the Taliban regime, which is, again, not a democratic institution, which is not any in any support of the humanitarian efforts of any kind. So, in such a situation where the economy is collapsing, we know for a fact that food scarcity has increased. There is no development as such taking place in the country. The main focus of the regime will be towards that as compared to working for, or introducing socioeconomic reforms in the country. Um,
But Ramshay, we have seen in all the conflict zones throughout the world, we have seen that whenever there is an apartheid, whenever there is a situation where a segment of society is neglected or persecuted, the international players, they jump in. The international welfare organization, the humanitarian groups, they jump in. They try to negotiate it out with the government. Do you think that in current situation we have any humanitarian player, globally or locally, who has tried to negotiate these terms with the Afghan government and tried to bring them to terms? Because just recently there has been a report where it has been reported that more than 60,000 salons which were closed by the Afghan regime, by the current Afghan regime, has resulted in a staggering loss of jobs for 145,000 women. this is beyond apprehension. So, do you think that any humanitarian group, either local or international, can suffice the situation right now?
I don't think any humanitarian organization can just come into a country like Afghanistan and start implementing these projects, because there are definitely a lot of roadblocks in terms of, will they even be allowed to enter the country? If they are being allowed to enter the country, are they even allowed to carry out the programs that they want to carry out? So there's a lot of different roadblocks to how any kind of development can take place, primarily because of this regime, which does not support women's rights in its totality. And even when we know for a fact that different organizations are interested, are looking towards working in the country, we know for a fact that it's next to impossible given the current situation. And for this reason, we need greater focus on Afghanistan from the global community. And it is only through
Now, actually,
platforms.
we have been seeing that Afghanistan has been the current Afghan regime. They have been trying to play with the optics. They have been inviting YouTubers and influencers in Afghanistan. They are trying to project Afghanistan as a tourist-friendly country. Do you think that when they have such a desperation to be recognized internationally, don't you think that there is a margin for humanitarian groups to negotiate their terms through?
The humanitarian groups can negotiate their terms, they can start the conversation at least, but that cannot happen without the intervention of regional as well as global players. So we need the countries coming forward. We can't only rely on these humanitarian efforts by these organizations, which primarily are backed by different countries globally. But at the same time, we need the leaders coming forward. We need to incentivize the presence of these NGOs, of these development organizations, of these donor funded projects in the country through certain socioeconomic projects. So for instance, if we talk about, if China comes forward with the Belt and Road Initiative, what we can communicate via China is that, along these projects, we will also include education for women. We will introduce modern curriculum. We will increase the number of women and girls going to school and having access to higher education. But then at the same time, for these kind of efforts to take place, we need to think together as a global solidarity towards Afghanistan. Again, is there an appetite for it in our global politics right now? I don't think so. Who is going to sit across from China and tell them, if you do this, and if you are going with your BRI project, maybe you can talk about this as well? That kind of conversation is not taking place in a global manner. It's more like a national interest, and what that country specifically would want to discuss and how that can be taken forward. So there's a very fragmented approach. There has always been a very fragmented approach when we talk about peace, lasting peace in Afghanistan.
Zia, coming towards you, we have seen in past that when there was COVID, when there was in USA we saw that in the previous administration people had a growing distrust towards the public education system, so they either shifted their students towards the private education, or they just started homeschooling. Don't you think that in the current scenario in Afghanistan, we can actually try to present an alternative curricula for the women who are at home, so that their education can continue? And also, can there be a clandestine learning network which should be not formally operated, because they have a problem. The Afghan government has a problem with the vice and virtue and everything else which they've been talking about. So they do not want women to come forward with education and go outside their houses. But don't you think that within the ramparts they have been confined in, they can be given an education, and can Malala Fund help that?
Thank you, Shafat. It's already happening in Afghanistan. And the brave Afghan women rights champions, education champions, they have these sacred schools. They have programs for online education. I wouldn't like to name that lady, but she runs institutions for 28,000 girls in Kabul and that region. There are sacred schools, and our fund, Malala Fund, our organization that is supporting a lot of programs, online education, and those secret schools as well. Since the fall of Kabul, we have been helped in evacuating some 54 families, 327 people out of Afghanistan, and they have been resettled in other countries like USA, Canada, Australia. So we are supporting as an organization the Afghan girls' education, but there is also risk that we don't want that this should be normalized that way, because education is a basic human right. How can you give secret education to 20 million Afghan women and girls, which is their basic human right? That's why, on the one hand, we are working on supporting all those organizations who are working for online education, secret education. That's important. And for me, at this time, every Afghan home should be a school. Every Afghan person, whether they are women or men, if they are educated, they should turn into teachers in this time, in this difficult time of ignorance and darkness, because that will prepare people for future. But that is not the solution. We have to come forward and we have to join hands with Afghan women rights activists and people like Ashraf Saab and so many others to dismantle that system. That is so important. Until and unless we dismantle that system, Afghan women and girls can't go out of that hill. So, having said that, online education is important, but that is not lasting solution. We have to do something for every Afghan girl who deserves education, like all human beings in the rest of the world, who deserve education like 1.8 billion Muslim women and girls, like population in the world. I mean, it's the total population, I should say, almost like 800 million, so many women and girls, Muslim girls and women. And they should get education like 54 Muslim countries where girls and women are getting education and they are doing work. That should be normal thing for Afghan women and girls. And for that, it is so important to dismantle the gender apartheid system that has been imposed by the Afghan Taliban for the last 4 years.
Zia Saab, there's a problem with humanitarian organization and the relief organizations involving themselves in the political work. But do you think that these efforts, the girls' education efforts, should be focused with a laser precision towards the girls' education only and do not involve themselves in any other topic at all? That's the only way they can, gain some confidence from the Afghan regime.
The problem is that for Afghan regime, like as Malala once said, that what Taliban are afraid of are a girl with a book, a girl with a voice. So gender apartheid system means that when women are excluded from every public life, from everything, and to continue that system, it's important for them. They are very smart to continue that system, to make it a normal for the Afghan people. It's important to ban girls' education. That's why they are so sensitive to girls' education. So many secret schools have been attacked. So many teachers have been taken and they have been tortured. But still, Afghan women education activists are working. So, what has changed in Afghanistan since the fall of Kabul? Like many things have changed, but the most important thing that has changed is for women and girls. Like no education for girls. And that is why I personally think that Afghan Taliban, as you mentioned, that other organizations, global organizations, there have been some efforts we had this Muslim World League conference in Islamabad, and Malala was the keynote speaker there. And so many countries, like the Khatibs and Maulanas and Muftis, and they came together. And they wrote in writing that Muslim girls are, they didn't mention Afghanistan in particular, but they said that girls' education is the right of a girl as is the right of a boy. And they also wrote that whoever stops it is un-Islamic. So they gave very strong verdicts, but Taliban like turned a deaf ear to it. So the problem is that we are stuck there. I wish that Taliban could have, I mean, the problem is, as I totally agree with Ashraf, because Taliban are not a government, they are a project. They don't consider themselves accountable to the Afghan people. We don't know who they are accountable to. Even you don't see the face of the Amir of the Taliban. Is he a ghost? Where he is, we don't know. So all these things which are happening in Afghanistan, sometimes they look very mysterious. So when they are not accountable to the people of Afghanistan, I wish they were, because if, like since the occupation of the Suez of Afghanistan and then that Cold War, whatever, then, I mean, it's a long history. But since then until now, no regime has changed peacefully. I wish that this time Taliban had a little bit wisdom and they could accommodate other ethnicities, other ideas, and they could form an inclusive government. That is the way forward. So what is happening right now, that should be dismantled. And if you want girls to go to school, if you want Afghan women to be able to go to work, and if you want a normal life for all Afghans, this system must go. And for 4 years, I mean, it's a long wait for 4 years.
The long way, definitely.
Things are not changing. I mean, this is time that world global powers and Pakistan and other countries like neighboring countries of Afghanistan, they should engage with the former democratic forces, with the former democratic government, its people, because now we don't see anyone else in the ground. Afghan Taliban is looked at, they are the only choice for the world, which is wrong. And also, second thing which I want to emphasize, that the change will come from the people of Afghanistan. I mean, when I see these women and girls on roads and streets of Kabul and Kandahar and so many other provinces coming out and risking their lives, I see hardly men with them. So this change should come from Afghanistan as well, because things won't change if you don't change for yourself. But unfortunately, Ashraf may not, he may not agree with me. The culture of peaceful change is not there in Afghanistan. Like Afghan people are looking that something will happen and somebody will change the system for us again. But that is not happening. So the responsibility comes, whatever is happening in the neighborhood.
Ziasab, you're actually putting your hand in a beehive, because this is a subject which needs a 2-hour debate, and unfortunately we are short of time. But thank you so much for your time and for your engagement. Ziauddin Yousafzai Saab, thank you so much for being with us. Ashraf Haidari Saab, thank you so much for being with us. And Ramshay, you're generous as usual. Thank you so much for being with us. It's truly insightful to have you on our show. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all from the Global Script. Keep watching Ocean News.